Hey, hello there everybody, and welcome to another week at Myton Kids.
Our God is so amazing. His love is never ending. Beyond imagination. He's worth our celebration. He deserves the loudest voice. I don't know about you, but I came here today to celebrate God in every song we sing and every game we play. To celebrate God, always amazing. His love will never end. So everybody in this place, celebrate God.
Well, last week we learned all about a guy called Isaiah.
Now, do you remember what God told Isaiah?
He said that he had a rescue plan.
Do you remember what that rescue plan was? Well, if you remember, Isaiah wrote about a future rescuer, king, servant, light, lamb, shepherd.
Absolutely. Can you remember that? A future rescuer, light, lamb, servant, king. A rescuer, light, lamb, servant, king, shepherd.
Yeah, and that future person was going to come to earth and do amazing things. But that person was also going to suffer as well. And that person was going to suffer and die, but then will be brought back to life and would help us to be friends with God again. Isn't that an amazing rescue plan that God told Isaiah? And you know what's even better is that it meant that when we were saved, God's people would be made perfect, be made right with him again. And that's what God told Isaiah.
Well, today we're going to be learning all about a different guy. A guy called Daniel. And did you know a fun fact about Grace? She is terrified.
Oh yeah.
She's really scared of cats. I know, cats. Who would have thought cats? No, not like that kind of a cat. Like this kind of a cat. Absolutely terrified. Well, today there's some scary cats. Not scary like Grace's kind. A bit bigger. Just like these ones. Absolutely.
Well, let's find out more about who Daniel was in our story today. Daniel and the scary sleepover. Things were not looking good for God's people. They had been captured and taken far from home, and now they were slaves of the king of Babylon. But God had not left his people. He was with them and he was looking after them. Daniel loved God, and Daniel obeyed God. Now, God made Daniel able to understand lots of difficult things. So it wasn't long before the king of Babylon noticed him. King Darius liked how clever Daniel was, so he made Daniel his most important helper of all and put him in charge of lots of other helpers. But the other helpers didn't like this. They wanted the king to like them better. They wanted to get rid of Daniel, so they spied on Daniel. They tried to find things that were wrong with Daniel, things they could tell the king, things they could, well, there weren't really anything that Daniel had done wrong. They couldn't find anything, except there was just one thing. Every day, 3 times a day, without fail, no matter what, Daniel went to his room, closed the door and prayed. They smiled to themselves. Let's go and tell the king to make a law that no one is allowed to pray to anyone except to the king. Daniel won't obey this law and he will be punished. They were pleased with themselves for being so clever and hurried off to tell the king. The king liked their idea, but he didn't know that they were tricking him. So he made it into a law. Every everyone must pray only to me. If you don't, the lions will have you for their dinner." Now Daniel heard this. He knew it was wrong to pray to anyone except God. He had to do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. So Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. That's just what the bad men knew Daniel would do. They skipped straight off to tell the king. "Oh, your most glittering highness, your law says it does not, that everyone must pray to you alone, sire." "Yes," said the king. "Oh, magisterial brightness, then correct us if we're wrong, but it would seem that Daniel is praying to God, not to you." The king was sad. He had been tricked. He didn't want to hurt Daniel, but he couldn't change his law. And so he let the soldiers throw Daniel to the lions. "May your God, who you love so much, rescue you," the king said. The king went back to his palace, but he didn't sleep that night, not a wink. He tossed and turned until finally, at the first glimmer of dawn, he leapt out of bed and ran straight to the den. "Daniel," he cried, "has God rescued you?" "Yes," Daniel shouted. God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths, and there, resting his head on Daniel's lap, was the biggest lion, purring like a little kitten. The king brought Daniel out of the den. "Look," he said, "Daniel doesn't even have a scratch." The king made a new law. Daniel's God is the true God, the God who rescues. Pray to him instead. God would keep on rescuing his people, and the time was coming when God would send another brave hero like Daniel, who would love God and do what God said, whatever the cost, even if it meant he would die. And together, they would pull off the greatest rescue the world has ever known.
Right, well, I thought we could do a game to recap what Grace told us in that story from the Bible about Daniel. So what I want you to do is get up on your feet, okay? And if you're with your parents, that means them up on their feet too as well. And what I want you to do is, if you think the answer is true, I want you to run this way, which is my left, and I think it'll be your right. And if you think it's false, I want you to run that way, which is my right, and I think it's your left. True? False? Got it? Great. Okay, are you ready? So, Daniel had a habit of praying every day. If you think it's true, that way. If you think it's false, that way. Well, if you're on this side, ding, you're right. Next question, everyone back in the middle. As Daniel was so clever, King Darius sent him to school. Is it true or is it false? It's false. Back in the middle. Instead of going to school, King Darius made Daniel the most important helper. Okay, next question. Other helpers liked Daniel and were happy he was in charge. True or false? True or false? It's false. They weren't happy at all, were they? Back in the middle. The other helpers spied on Daniel and tried to find things that he did wrong. Is it true or is it false? It's true. If you're on this side, over here, you're right. If you're over here, you're wrong. Daniel had done nothing wrong. True over here, or false over here? Of course it's true, we've just did it the other way round. Okay, next question, back in the middle. The other helpers knew that Daniel prayed to God every day. Is that true or is it false? True is over here, false is over here. It's true! The helpers got King Darius to make new law that no one is allowed to pray to anyone except to him. True or false? It was true. Well, it wasn't a very good thing that they did, but it was true. Okay, next question, back in the middle. Daniel knew what it was, but he also obeyed God, even though it cost him a lot. Is that true or is it false? True or false? It's true! Daniel knew, didn't he, that if he'd obeyed the new rules, it would have been wrong. And instead, he listened to God. Next question. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, but the lions weren't very hungry, so they left him there. Is that true or is it false? It's false! They were hungry, but God made sure that they didn't eat him. And Daniel was probably quite scared. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, but God sent an angel to close the lion's mouth. True or false? It's true! It wasn't that they weren't hungry. It wasn't that they had thought they'd eaten enough people called Daniel for one day. No, they were hungry and they probably would have eaten him. But it was God that came and made the lions close their mouths by sending an angel. Well, I hope you had fun running around, and we're going to continue having lots of fun now by singing our next song, which is one we learnt a couple weeks ago, all about a guy called David. But in that song, it also mentions a guy called Daniel, which is the guy we're talking about today. And so I don't know if you can remember it, but there's a couple of actions that we learned a couple of weeks back. Shall we go through them now? It goes, "My God's the king of the giants," because that was about David and Goliath, who was a giant. "My God's the king of the lions," because we're talking about the lions today. And "my God's the king of the creatures of the deep," talking about Jonah, who we'll talk about next week. And "my God's the king of me." And then I love doing 2 claps at the end. Okay, why don't you listen and dance and sing along to this song now?